trouble and mentions having heard that he was quite brave and unafraid of being defeated. We then discover that the hooded person is a beautiful woman named Erna Verners, 7th in the direct lineage of the Vernars. Let's now go to the castle of Archduke Vernars. There the old man remains seated on the throne while observing the protagonist. He says that the young man became an official warrior and even easily won the duel against Mr. Daisley. Mord simply confirms this and says he's there to collect what was promised him. Then the Lord asks if he only requested the combat god's spirit to become a warrior faster, to which the protagonist responds that he actually couldn't stand by while his instructor neglected his role. The patriarch then approaches, saying that the strong are always right, and that's the motto of the Vernars. That's why he sees no problem with his actions. But what piques his curiosity is why he hid his powers before. Our hero explains that he was being cautious with the use of mana and impulse because he didn't know how to control them, as it was his first time using both. The patriarch finds that explanation reasonable. He's sure the protagonist came there just to challenge the combat god's tomb, and the latter affirms this. However, one of the guards present advises him to reconsider his choice a bit, as allowing him to challenge the tomb before the announcement will make some people complain. But upon hearing his subordinate try and give his opinion, the patriarch becomes completely irritated, asking how he dares suggest that he rethink his decision. The man quickly asks for forgiveness from his lord while thinking he should have come wearing brown pants. He explains that a promise is a debt. Soon he allows the protagonist to challenge the combat god's tomb, though he doesn't know why he wants to do so. Mord then kneels, thanking the Lord for this decision, while giving a small smirk knowing he achieved his goal and will finally collect the first fragment of the world. The two then arrive at the entrance of the combat god's tomb. We see that the one accompanying the protagonist is Kessner, and he says that only one person can enter at a time and another can only enter when the previous one dies. Mord thinks that it's bigger than he expected and that he only knew the combat god's tomb was in the Archduke's basement but didn't know it was like this. And soon the blonde man says he can't believe Mord will be the first to challenge it. He adds that all of this is a result of what Mord has done, so he must ensure he returns alive. Mord begins approaching the gate, thanking his instructor, but before entering he stops in front of it because just standing in front of this thing is giving him chills. According to the myth of the Verners Archduchy, the combat god Verners had never encountered death. Instead, he merely abandoned his human destiny and became a god. The name Combat God's Tomb is just a name Verners gave it with a different meaning. Mord then remembers a phrase he read in the novel, which said that divine human remains inhabit this place. Finally, he opens the door and is met with a bright light. As he approaches, he knows that in 7 years, Aiden will obtain the first fragment of the world and that he will also need an assistant. However, at this time, the fragment of the world should still be inside. And soon the gate closes, locking the protagonist in that space. As he walks further into the place, he comes across various extremely bizarre structures. He is startled because it's completely different from what was described in the novel. He knows that the combat god's tomb has 6 spatial sketches, but the one described in the novel was only one of those 6. And no matter which one it is, they should all have a seal. So he only needs to find it. The seal should be a stone statue representing the life of the combat god, but soon we realize that something is watching him. After walking for a while, he remarks that nothing in that place seems realistic. In fact, it looks like someone made it in Photoshop and only halfway done at that. But soon something catches his attention as he notices smoke and fire coming from somewhere, realizing that it's hellhounds ready to attack him. Moreover, there are 2 of them, and our protagonist seems cornered as the rabid dogs watch him. Mord, who thought he wouldn't have to face so many monsters, feels a little disappointed, and soon he sees one hellhound charging at him. But with a quick strike, he neutralizes the first hellhound, immediately preparing to go after the second. However, he doesn't even mean to get close since he uses his mana to separate its lower half from the upper half. As he continues searching for the statues, he remarks that it's unnecessarily exhausting. Soon he seems to reach his destination and finally finds the hidden seal. He sees a statue that appears to be the combat god defeating Etten in his youth, but he doesn't understand why it was turned into a seal. He comments that for him to have placed a statue like that, it seems he had a lot of self-love and must also be the man standing on top of the creature. The protagonist then begins to spread his mana around, and with just one leap, he jumps to the top of the statue, landing skillfully there. And he comes face to face with the statue of the ancestor. Upon observing the statue, he realizes that it's meant to be Werner's at 10 years old and understands why all his descendants seem like they overindulged in the juice. Mord quickly activates the combat god's blood and makes a small cut on his arm. He then approaches the statue of the founder and pours some of his blood onto the statue, thinking that it would have been difficult to find if he hadn't had a hint. And who would have imagined that after awakening the divine blood, one would have to place some on the combat god's statue? Then he quickly jumps down from the giant statue and thinks he should be glad to be the first to do this. But he needs to hurry and move on to the next seal. However, as he is leaving, we notice that the statue is now staring at him, and its skull seems to be cracking. Sometime later, we see that the protagonist has come a long way, having faced giant snakes, hellhounds, skeletons in armor, and various other monsters. In fact, he is now finishing off one of the skeletons. Yet these monsters continue to appear out of nowhere. He thinks that since the place he's in is just an alley, there's no way to avoid them. As the giant snake attacks him, he thinks it would make more sense for the combat god's test to be more straightforward. He then begins to condense his mana into his fist, deciding to finish off all the enemies that appear along the way. He believes this must be the type of test the combat god is proposing. Some flying monsters observe our hero from the top, but he realizes that these monsters are actually guarding the top of the wall to prevent him from climbing. At least he won't have to worry about fighting them on the ground. At this point, he has already found 5 of the seals, and now there's only 1 left. Then he will finally be able to acquire the fragment of the world. As he advances, he feels more mana, and perhaps because he has awakened the divine blood 5 times, he's also running low on mana. But something catches his attention, making him stop. Mord looks up with a serious gaze. It seems he has finally reached the 6th seal, a giant stone dragon. Like the others, this statue is very large, and it looks like it's going to be a challenge to climb. But before he does anything, the noise catches his attention. When he looks back, he sees a huge blue ogre staring at him. He immediately assumes a battle stance, knowing this is a monster that even magical impulse fighters would have difficulty with. The blue ogre roars and prepares to charge our hero, slamming its fist into the ground in an instant, completely cracking the floor. However, Mord quickly dodges the ogre's attack, realizing that this is an ordinary monster since the average height of an ogre is 4 meters. But the monster in front of him is definitely over 5 meters tall. The battle continues with the blue giant trying to hit the protagonist, while Mord uses all his speed to dodge the attacks. As he prepares to counterattack, he thinks it was too easy to be true, and that it will be much more interesting to fight this monster. Mord then begins to unleash a flurry of attacks on the ogre, even managing to push the blue monster back. However, while distracted, the ogre grabs him in midair and throws him against a wall right after, causing significant damage to the protagonist's body. At that moment, he realizes he won't be able to defeat it with just an impulse. He sees the massive creature running towards him, throwing its fist back, preparing for an attack. And at that moment, he accepts that he will have to use that technique. But maybe it's already too late, as the ogre hits the protagonist squarely, feeling victorious after easily defeating the boy who was its enemy. But then the ogre is surprised by an explosion from the crater it created. The protagonist speaks, saying that he's just a rookie with good genetics. The explosion sends the ogre flying several meters back. We then see that the protagonist activated his superior instinct, knowing that if he had taken any longer, he would have died. The furious ogre gets up, ready for round 2. But what it didn't expect was the protagonist charging a massive energy sphere in his fist. As Mord tells the blue giant to shut up, he delivers a blow that explodes the entire area around them, completely obliterating the ogre. Even though he won, Mord feels a little disappointed that he had to activate the divine blood to win. He thought he could defeat it without using it. Mord then walks away from his enemy, thinking that this dungeon is used by 15-year-old boys from the direct lineage, and that it seems battle knowledge and physical training really make a difference. That's why as soon as he leaves, he's going to start everything from scratch. He then reaches the top of the stone dragon and looks at the combat god, thinking there's something wrong with his height. Since his father is 25 meters tall, the combat god, who is supposed to be his ancestor, should be a little taller than that. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter. He pours some of his blood on the statue, trying to obtain the fragment of the world. But some time passes and absolutely nothing happens. Mord begins to think something went wrong, as according to the novel, he should have gained a fragment of the world after activating all the statues. And he thinks that maybe he forgot his seal, so he decides to retrace his steps and find each one. But suddenly, he hears a voice saying it's disappointed and that it expected its descendants to be a little stronger. When he turns around, he finds himself face to face with a mysterious man staring at him. We soon realize that the man is the statue of the combat god, now brought to life, and he says that if he had been left there, he would have been sad about his descendant. The reason our hero decided to enter the combat god's tomb is because he remembers the protagonist from the novel obtaining a fragment of the world inside. However, the only thing he's seeing is a moving and talking statue. Our hero wonders if this is some kind of hidden text. He then asks the man who he is, but the man ignores him, instead asking how old Mord is. But as Mord activates his superior instinct, he remains determined to find out who this man is, which impresses the elder. The protagonist quickly charges in, delivering a punch that causes a powerful shockwave. However, the attack doesn't affect the man at all, who simply says that Mord is overstepping his limits. He immediately counterattacks, throwing the protagonist backward, causing him to crash into a wall, leaving him a bit confused about what just happened. But then he sees the massive figure leaping toward him, saying it's time to give him a proper welcome. Mord receives a punch straight to his stomach, launching him into the ground like a cannonball. The impact is so strong that it kicks up a massive cloud of dust. Soon, we see the protagonist emerging from the crater slightly battered, as he wonders if he's experiencing some kind of illusion, since this was just a stone statue a few seconds ago. The old man then asks if Mord truly doesn't know who he is, while the protagonist responds saying he knows he's the stone statue of the combat god. But the man quickly explains that he isn't exactly a stone statue, but rather the human shadow that the combat god left behind. Upon hearing this, our hero was shocked, as it was mentioned in the novel that the combat god's tomb contained his human remains, and this means the tomb was meant for his human form, not his divine one. However, the novel said that the statues represented achievements in his life, and it probably means they were also imbued with his will. The elder says that although it's hard to believe, it's the truth, but you will show Mord a bit of his power to make him truly believe. The protagonist then sees only a shadow of a hand approaching, while the elder says that reality checks are called shocks because they hurt for real. He delivers a punch to his descendant, who barely manages to defend himself. Excited, the elder says the protagonist is weaker than he had imagined. But our hero doesn't retreat and begins to prepare his Saitama punch, which excites the ancestor, who is thrilled that Mord has the energy to fight him. Mord then throws a straight punch, but the hero dodges and moves into the elder's blind spot, impressing the old man with the young man's speed. While Mord prepares an attack powerful enough to kill him, he charges a Kamehameha imbued with his mana. However, the truth is that the elder seems disappointed that he used such a trick, effortlessly slapping the condensed energy sphere away as it approaches. Mord takes advantage of the smoke caused by the explosion to strike the old man, surprising him that the impulse ball was fake. But in the next instant, the old man grabs the boy by the head and throws him far away, saying only a weak and foolish person would use such a trick. Even in the air, the man manages to catch up to him, delivering more blows, while psychotically saying he loves hitting people with his bare hands. As Mord takes the hits, he realizes he won't be able to defeat him with divine power alone. He even wonders if he's dreaming, since the power difference between him and the elder is massive. He is then furiously slammed into the ground. While the elder continues to strike, saying that Mord has a long way to go, he suddenly stops with a smile on his face, since the protagonist is already completely beaten. But even so, he delivers a final kick, sending Mord crashing into a wall. The elder then says he's disappointed that the protagonist has such little strength. He explains that if this were a real battle, Mord would already be dead. But even trembling, our hero stands up, saying it's not over yet. However, he becomes alarmed as his divine blood power suddenly stops working. This disappoints the old man, as just a few attacks were enough to stop the protagonist's ability, and he wonders how his descendants became so weak. As he approaches, he asks if this is enough proof that he's telling the truth, while the protagonist questions whether he is really the combat god. But the old man replies that here, Mord can call him Vernars. He adds that he has seen many descendants face this dungeon, but Mord is the first to awaken in this way. However, when Vernars learns that 500 years have passed until someone managed to awaken, the old man is incredulous that so much time has passed. He says it doesn't make sense since it's not something that should have been that difficult to resolve. Mord explains that after he ascended to the heavens, two of his sons got into a conflict, each claiming to be the successor of the combat god, and the loser took his subordinates and left. The old Hulk never imagined it would cause so many problems once he left. He then looks at the protagonist a bit disappointed, saying he shouldn't have revealed this side of himself to the young man. He then turns and asks if the young man has any idea what awakening truly means. With conviction, our protagonist says he has no idea. Hearing this, the old man can't believe it and asks why he put his blood on the statues then. The protagonist responds that he was searching for the fragment of the world. In the novel, when Aiden obtained the fragment, the combat god didn't appear, so he figures that the god only awakened because the blood Mord placed was from his direct lineage. The old man then explains that the meaning of the awakening and the reason he left this shadow behind is to teach about the personification of divine blood. This puts the protagonist on high alert, imagining that the old man is about to teach him how to fully use his blood and power. Mord quickly questions why this knowledge wasn't passed down to future generations, but the old man explains that there's a problem. The first generation that learned wouldn't have been able to pass it on to the second. Since the talent to use divine blood is proportional to the concentration of that blood, this means that with each passing generation, the blood becomes weaker. In other words, the more generations, the harder it becomes to improve, and if someone appears who can't master it, they will have a serious problem. That's why the combat god's tomb was created. It's a training ground for descendants and a teaching method, since once you can personify the blood and reach this stage, you'll be able to use divine power perfectly. Our hero knows that compared to 500 years ago, the blood has diluted significantly, and the reason the Archduke is the villain is because he broke a taboo caused by this limitation. And although things have gotten a bit more complicated, Mord now has the chance to learn overpowered skill, so he'll have to start training with this old man. Mord eagerly says that if it's training, he'll be happy to do it, and asks how Vernars will teach him. But as you can imagine, this old man isn't likely to be a good teacher, so the training method will be simple. They will just fight, and fight non-stop. Upon hearing this reckless training method, our hero begins to feel disappointed. The old man then sarcastically asks if people today get everything handed to them on a silver platter. But obviously, our hero is just afraid of dying, since he recently broke 4 ribs. However, with a malicious grin, the old man says it probably doesn't hurt anymore. When the protagonist checks, the pain really is gone. The old man then shares two pieces of good news. First, while he's in this place, all injuries and mana regenerate immediately, and second, he won't be the one facing Mord. This makes our hero curious about who his opponent will be. In the next moment, an enormous wave of destruction erupts from the statue, startling the protagonist and disappointing the old man, who says that this guy always likes to show off. Soon we see a younger version of the combat god, who looks at the protagonist with disdain and questions if this is really the one he has to train. Mord knows that this young version is the combat god at 10 years old, and since his hair isn't silver, he likely hasn't reached the power level to fully use the divine blood. This is in contrast to the old man, who not only has completely white hair but also gray eyes. The old ancestor instructs his descendant to endure as long as possible, while the younger combat god taunts, saying that Mord won't even land a punch on him. He adds that it will be embarrassing to lose to a 10-year-old, frightening the protagonist. But our hero, who is also at the peak of his 15 years, doesn't back down and asks if he came to fight or talk, and that empty vessels are the ones that make the most noise, so instead of talking so much, he should shut up and start battling. Our protagonist says this because he thinks his physique is better than the young man's. However, the young man responds that he won't use divine blood, since if he does, our hero will die. But these words end up irritating Mord. He charges at the kid, hoping those words aren't lies. However, sometime later he finds out it wasn't a lie, since he ends up face down on the ground, unable to last 10 seconds in the fight. Both realize that he is only strong physically and has no fighting experience, so they will have to teach him from the basics. Mord then asks how one of his descendants doesn't know how to fight, but the protagonist says he never learned. This leaves the old man confused about how one of his firstborns doesn't know how to fight. But soon the protagonist explains everything that happened and how the Archduke was distributing his genes. Upon hearing how things are, the old man becomes dissatisfied and says that if he could leave, he would give the Archduke a beating. He extends his hand to the protagonist and says he'll give him a tip on how to beat the 10-year-old. The old man explains that the protagonist keeps getting hit by the same attack pattern, and that to overcome this pattern, he must use the arrogance of the young god of combat. Meanwhile, the kid yawns and says that two adults want to beat up a child, and that's shameful. But our hero, who is only 15, starts to get irritated. And so the 11th round begins. Our protagonist tries all possible patterns to hit the young one, looking for an opportunity to attack and turn the tables. But the outcome is always the same, and he keeps getting beaten as he searches for that opportunity. 74 rounds have already passed, and he continues to charge fiercely. But the young one just dodges his attacks as if they were nothing, even dodging the protagonist's surprise attacks, and counterattacking immediately afterward. The kick was so strong that it undid the divine blood transformation. And while the protagonist was wiping the dirt from his nose, he ends up getting punched right in the mouth, but actually the punch hit the wall next to him. And the 10-year-old god of combat wonders if he got scared, or if the cat got his tongue since he's all mad about losing again. But the protagonist ends up noticing something, a small cut on the young one's cheek, indicating that his attack worked and that he managed to touch him. The battles continue and the old god of combat keeps helping the protagonist, until a moment comes when he can see the next moves of the 10-year-old god of combat and how he's going to counterattack. The protagonist then leaps forward and lands an attack as if a meteor shower were crashing down, burying the 10-year-old god of combat's head in the ground. Both the old man and the protagonist are happy since he finally landed a punch on him. However, at that moment he sees a spark of lightning, and soon a hand emerges from the smoke. But before it hits him, our protagonist manages to move away. Then he hears the young one saying that he seems to be learning, so now he doesn't need to hold back anymore. We then realize that the god of combat is quite resentful, especially because it's the first time he's seen his own blood, and also because he had never been hit by anyone before. For this reason, he decides to stop holding back and charges for real, and just trying to block the young one's attack drags the protagonist backward, realizing that if the fight continues like this, things could get ugly, and even his body might end up torn apart. He then jumps back to try to escape, while wondering why the god of combat isn't trying to stop him, and it seems that the silky-haired old man doesn't care about what happens to him. The younger one then approaches, asking if he thinks he has time to be looking elsewhere, and soon delivers a blow to our hero's abdomen, which throws him far back, making him crash into a rock, even managing to get a little ketchup out of our protagonist, and looking extremely happy with a sadistic smile. Without giving the boy time to recover, the naked one charges again. And our hero, who has no time to react, can only see his end approaching, as he receives a barrage of attacks. The 10-year-old god of combat grabs our hero's arm, and simply throws him into the air like a ragdoll, also jumping right after. In the air, he begins to prepare his final move, kicking him down and making him crash into the ground. At this moment, Mord can no longer use the divine blood. In fact, he can't even move a single finger. However, it is at this moment that he notices something falling his direction, and when he looks up, it's already too late. A piece of the statue is collapsing on him. Right after the impact, a cloud of dust forms, while the god of combat wonders if our hero is still alive. But incredibly, he manages to raise his fist, making the god of combat admit that he truly has guts to endure all of this. But unfortunately, it seems that's all he has, since his legs have been pinned by the statue. And when he looks down, he realizes he can't move them, automatically panicking. The 10-year-old jumps from the top of the statue, while preparing an attack that will ensure his legs stop hurting. Meanwhile, our protagonist reflects that he can only use the divine blood in at least 8 seconds. Time keeps passing, but he probably won't have enough time to recover, since the attack is practically upon him. But at that moment, he shows all this cunning and says he's curious about something. Then we see something quickly approaching the 10-year-old's eyes, and swiftly passing like a line across them. Mord says that the Werners' lineage has terrifying physiques, but wonders if their eyes are as sensitive as normal people's. Soon, the confirmation of his question is evident, as the god of combat's eyes swell up and he can no longer see the protagonist in front of him. However, at that moment, in a fit of rage, he uses the divine blood, as he prepares to truly finish off the protagonist. But before his punch can land, the countdown finally stops, and the god of combat's attack only creates a crater in the ground, since the protagonist managed to activate his divine blood and dodge, automatically attacking him from behind. When the boy realizes this and looks back, he already sees the protagonist questioning him, since he said he would kill him if he awakened the divine blood. But the one who will actually lose this fight is him. Mord then finishes the fight by delivering a solid punch to the kid's face, feeling happy for finally landing a hit. However, reality proves to be much harsher. Or rather, the kid's head proves to be much harder, as the protagonist's punch did absolutely nothing. The 10-year-old then grabs him by the neck and prepares an attack, saying that this is how you really strike, making the protagonist feel disappointed, as it seems the boy is too much for his current power. But at that moment, the old man intervenes, ordering him to stop fighting, and soon the protagonist is thrown far away, leaving him confused, wondering what happened. But when he looks forward, he sees the old man's back, and realizes that he stopped the younger one's attack with just one hand. He then questions what he's doing, as he told him to teach, not kill. So the training is over. The younger one asks if he would say the same if he were in his place, but the elder just gives a cold stare at his younger self. And like a child who disobeyed his father, the younger one quickly reverts to his normal form and starts agreeing. The protagonist, who is observing all of this, realizes that the younger one is afraid of the elder, and is just happy to have survived. But at that moment, he begins to hear an earthquake. And when he looks up, he notices the entire subspace collapsing, while the elder says it's time to differentiate between dream and reality. He explains that the protagonist has divine blood different from his, and it's likely because he's a descendant of Arita, who was also part of the Vernars. In fact, not even the elder knows what this combination will do, as even though he is the son of a goddess, he never imagined someone from the Vernar lineage would have their blood mixed with hers. He then points his finger at the protagonist's head and says he will grant him the blessing of the body of the god of combat as a reward. The protagonist then begins to feel a small energy taking over his body and spreading through every cell of his organism, granting him immense strength. When he looks at his body, he says that he's never seen this appear in the novel, and then the old man says that's all he can do. He hopes to see him again, and even telling his younger self to say goodbye, but the younger one seems clearly irritated. However, his attention is caught by the protagonist, who says that he has only faced weaklings so far, but it seems that he's different and believes the current generation can't even reach his level. For this reason, he thanks him for everything he learned. And although the 10-year-old boy has the physique of a man who's been on steroids for 50 years, his personality is still very easy to please, and he becomes quite happy with the protagonist's compliments. Our hero then wakes up lying on the ground, and as he gets up, he wonders if that whole subspace was just a dream. But when he looks forward, he finds his objective. The fragment of the world, a tool used by great ancestral gods to create the world, is right in front of him. This piece is the perfect world that Adam used to gain enormous power and eventually bring this world to its end. Our hero then touches the fragment and begins to absorb its essence, while thinking that since he got it first, now the novel's hero won't be able to become as strong. And even though it's disappointing that the protagonist is losing to a supporting character, it's all for a good happy ending. We then return to the real world, where someone is calling for Lady Erna. The man says that Morn has returned from the tomb of the god of war. The young woman explains that's why she's creating a plan to appear as a cool sister to her adopted little brother. Unlike other families, the candidates for succession in the Vernar's family aren't just the Duke's children, but all the children, whether from the direct bloodline or not. Among them, there are 5 candidates who are at close levels to duel for this position: the 7th, the 6th, the 4th, the 3rd, and the Archduke. But the fact that the protagonist completed the tomb of the god of war caused a massive effect on all of them. We then see a young man drinking tea while mentioning that all the successors are trying to recruit Mord, and that he can't let such a talented child fall into the wrong hands. We discover that this young man is the 6th child, Vidin. Next, we move to the Archduke's castle, where some servants are showing the protagonist his new residence. His room turns out to be extremely luxurious, and we discover that he has been sent to the first outer region of the castle, where the richest stay. While most common warriors reside in the 2nd region, he was sent to the 3rd, probably because he has Vernar's blood and awakened the divine blood. They even placed him near a training field so he could train. In addition, they assign him 2 servants to carry out his orders, making him happy that he's finally living a noble's life. Suddenly, someone arrives knocking on the door and asking if Mr. Mord is there. But when the servant opens the door to see who it is, she gets startled. However, the 2 men completely ignore her and ask if the protagonist is Mord. We learn that warriors can be divided into 4 ranks from common to specialists. The protagonist starts evaluating the 2 and assumes they are probably intermediate rank. One of them pulls out a scroll and begins reciting the words of his young master Bren, who is impressed by Mord's achievements. He believes that Mord's talents will be of great use and therefore hopes he accepts his proposal to become a warrior, promising good news. The man says that the protagonist should be happy to receive the offer to be his sword. However, he is soon surprised when Mord asks who sent the scroll. Since he doesn't remember who this young master Bren is, and with so many successors in the novel, he can only recall those who survived 7 years later. This petulance from the protagonist angers the 2 men. They approach the protagonist asking if he's looking for a fight, but then someone asks if he knows young master Vidin. Apparently, the 2 men recognize the voice as they turn around scared, and we soon see a blonde man with a scar on his face standing there. Our protagonist realizes from their reaction that this man is probably an intermediate warrior and that Vidin is the 6th young master. The blonde man approaches, saying he's there for the same reason as the 2, while explaining that the strongest should gain the protagonist's loyalty. But these words irritate the other warrior, who asks if he's up for a one-on-one fight. However, what the warrior didn't expect was that the blonde man with a beastly look was actually up for a one-on-one fight, inviting him to step outside and settle it. And if the man isn't confident, then he should tuck his tail between his legs and disappear, taking the opportunity to inform him that his young master is a loser. The warrior, unable to do anything, just grits his teeth, while telling Wolves that he'll regret this. Observing the 2 backing down from the blonde, our protagonist realizes that not all intermediate warriors are on the same level. Soon, the man turns in his direction asking if he is Lord Mord, introducing himself as Wolves while our hero questions whether he should address him as a veteran. But the man says no, since those 2 idiots were older than him but weaker. The true measure of a warrior is not their age or rank, but their strength. Our hero agrees and says that the reason he came is to try and get him to join Vidin's side. Wolves says that's exactly it, and since he's a rising star, he brought this incredible offer. And as he approaches with a menacing look, he warns that he'll do whatever it takes to make him accept following his lord, even if it means using some force. He warns our hero that he might be feeling overconfident after beating some weaklings, but it's time to face reality. Realizing that the blonde man is eager to fight and taken by force, our hero finds it exciting, as it will allow him to see the results of his training. A little while later, the 2 are outside in the training area. Mord asks if the man will use some kind of weapon, since he isn't from the Vernar's lineage. But the blonde explains that he doesn't need one as he has something much stronger. He activates an ability in his hand and explains that it's the Impulse Gauntlet. He heard that the protagonist nearly lost to an instructor while using Divine Blood, and this gauntlet is an advanced ability that beginner warriors like him wouldn't be able to replicate. And as he says that the chances of defeating him drop to 0, he's shocked by something. He realizes that the protagonist was able to easily copy his Impulse Gauntlet. Surprised, the blonde asks how he learned it in just 4 days as it seems impossible. But the protagonist quickly charges at him, asking if he really believes that, and that 4 days is plenty of time for him to evolve significantly. The 2 then begin a fight that is almost invisible due to their speed. But Wolves is having trouble keeping up with our hero's speed, and while he tries to formulate a counterattack plan, he nearly has his head hit by the hero's fist. Now on the ground, incapacitated and scared, the only thought likely running through his head is that he should have come wearing brown pants. With just 1 punch, the protagonist was able to create a giant crater in the training room. The blonde realizes that he may have become much stronger in these 4 days or that he had been hiding his full strength. However, he tells the protagonist not to underestimate him. And that's exactly what he does. He starts amplifying his mana even more. Looking at him with a superior tone, he says he was just warming up. Wolves begins to lose confidence, saying that there's no way he almost lost to the instructor with this amount of mana, and that even as a Vernar's descendant, it's impossible to have this much mana. That's why he assumes the protagonist was hiding his strength and questions him about this, asking if he was holding back during the fight with Instructor Daisley. Our hero knows he wouldn't believe him if he explained what really happened, and that he truly evolved in 4 days. In reality, this tremendous evolution is due to receiving the blessing of the body of the god of combat, and beyond bringing innate talent to the surface, his physical abilities and mana gradually increase as a result. Furthermore, the Fragment of the World acts as an almost infinite mana source, and although he hasn't used the mana from the Fragment of the World yet, it's amusing to see them react like this when he's not even using his maximum power. The blonde admits that he underestimated him, but now he will fight seriously, since he would like to see the protagonist's true strength. Watching what the man is doing, our hero starts to feel a little scared. As his clothes begin to tear, and his hands transform into terrifying claws, along with his jaw that resembles that of a dog with sharp teeth, the protagonist wonders who his mother really is. He remembers that in the novel, there are people who suffer from the full moon curse, and when that day arrives, it transforms and start attacking those around them. However, among them there are some who manage to overcome and control their power. This fusion between man and monster is called a lycanthrope, and it seems that Wolf, besides having a name similar to a wolf, is indeed a lycanthrope who perfectly controls his powers. He then casts a bloodthirsty gaze and asks if the protagonist is ready. Watching that sinister transformation, the only thing going through our hero's mind is that the guy just got even bigger. However, he charges into the fight, knowing he has more mana than Wolf's. He throws the first punch, but his punch seems to have no effect, leaving him confused as to why Wolf's wasn't thrown back. The monster says that while the hero's mana is indeed better than his, the difference in their physiques is staggering. The werewolf then begins preparing an attack, and before the protagonist can do anything to defend himself, he's hit squarely by a punch from the giant wolf. He's sent flying backward, crashing into a wall behind him. The impact is so strong that it leaves a crater where the protagonist hit. It even causes some ketchup to spill from his mouth. Realizing that the werewolf is stronger than he imagined, our protagonist still refuses to use his divine blood, as with his greater mana, the fight is still even. He then gets up, asking the wolf what he thinks about ending this. However, the man gets irritated and thinks the protagonist has realized he's going to lose and is trying to end the fight without using divine blood. But the protagonist explains that he doesn't know what will happen if he uses it and fears he might accidentally kill him. This only irritates the werewolf further with such arrogance. So instead of using divine blood, the protagonist decides to use the fragment of the world. While preparing the mana in his heart, he explains that he hasn't used everything he has. He explains that people with the fragment of the world can use it by extracting its mana after completing the tomb with the god of combat. He managed to do this by using a training method he read in the novel, but since he only has one fragment, he can only use the blessing of the body of the god of combat for 20 seconds. But that's enough time to break the imbalance in the fight. Upon realizing the young man has increased his mana even further, the monster says that the protagonist is the real monster. Still, he launches a slicing attack toward the young man, but the protagonist just stands there watching the attack approach. However, with quick movements, he dodges all the slashes. Then he advances immediately to capture the wolf. Mord places his hand on the ground and uses his entire body to propel himself forward. And when the werewolf realizes what the protagonist is doing, it's already too late. The protagonist is concentrating a lot of mana in his hand. With just one blow, the wolf is struck with a shock powerful enough to send him flying and completely destroy one of the nearby buildings. The others who are watching the fight are worried about wolves, while the protagonist is more concerned about his home. Afraid that the werewolf might have died, they quickly rush to check on him. But it turns out the man is fine. He's just a little sad for having lost and won't be able to face his master after failing. He remembers the conversation he had with Vidin, where Vidin said Mord could become a tremendous help. So he asks Wolves to bring him in, even if it meant using unconventional methods. The werewolf slowly begins to get up, while the protagonist remarks that the fight is over but that he also lost his house in the process. At that moment, something approaching startles him. The werewolf manages to stand up again, but his energy is completely different. A dark aura spreads across his entire body, and the beast now seems to have completely lost control. Mord wonders if he still has another trick up his sleeve, as his form has changed again. And since the man's strength has grown tremendously, the protagonist realizes he won't be able to hold back and will have to use his divine power. However, before he can do so, someone yells for him to stop the fight. And at the same second, something strikes the werewolf's back. The blow sends him flying meters away, halting his transformation. The two men rush toward the person who did this, shouting the woman's name, revealing to the protagonist that she is Erna, the seventh child. The men are concerned about all this violence, but she explains that if Wolves had continued, he would have died from being unable to control that form. She adds that Wolves will agree with her, so they should take him to the doctor. We then see that the man is completely incapacitated on the ground. She turns to the protagonist and says that they've never met before, but that she's heard great things about him. As she approaches, our hero notices that her physique is similar to his. However, unlike him, her face looks like that of a delicate girl, while her body resembles that of a gorilla. When she says she wants to be called Big Sis, the protagonist immediately refuses, thinking this girl is very strange. A while later, we see Erna in her room, hugging a pillow and screaming in embarrassment. Her butler comments that this is why he told her not to execute the cool big sister operation. Since Mord is an illegitimate child who has lived his whole life as an inferior, it would be strange for someone superior to suddenly want to be his friend. But that's exactly why she thought he'd like her. She's also impressed that he defeated Wolves without using divine blood. Even her butler is shocked, as despite Wolves' inexperience, his abilities are those of a specialist warrior. Of course, the defeat of Wolves quickly spread rumors about the protagonist throughout the Artucci. Soon, everyone was talking about how he defeated Wolves. As the butler suggests they try to persuade him with a good proposal, someone bursts into the room. Before the woman can say anything, the man announces that Viscount Winsel has declared that Mord will accompany him on the obstruction mission. The next day, we see the protagonist returning home, surprised that's already been repaired. He thought the wolf would be furious for losing the fight, but in fact, Wolf accepted defeat and even paid for the repairs. However, when he looks up his house, he sees Mr. Kestner watching him. Kestner says that the protagonist has been causing trouble since he returned, but the hero explains that everyone is fighting over him, so it's not his fault. Kestner then says that in 10 days is subordinates and he will go on a mission and asks if the protagonist will join them. Our hero already knows what kind of mission this is, and the man confirms that it's to prevent demonification. Demonification occurs when the demon world attempts to contact humanity, causing monsters to mutate and a demon appears, becoming the core of the dungeon. In short, demonification can be separated into 3 stages. The first stage is when an unknown vortex appears. The second stage is when the vortex solidifies, making it possible to enter. The third stage is when the region around the vortex begins to corrupt and creatures from the demon realm become more powerful. When the third stage is complete, a dungeon break occurs where demonic monsters fully connect to the world. To prevent damage from the third stage, it's best to stop at the second. Kestner explains that although it's a good opportunity, it's a dangerous mission where many people die, so he won't force him. Our hero knows that Kestner, the Archduke's right-hand man, will be very helpful in the future, so it's worth the risk. And since he's already gained a lot of attention after the fight with the wolf, it's better to accept Kestner's offer and be under his protection. He then gets up from his chair and says he accepts, asking if he should start training in the afternoon. A while later, the protagonist heads to the training hall with Kestner, where he's introduced to the team he'll be joining. The blonde explains that this is the boy from the rumors, the one who defeated instructor Daisley and recently bested an intermediate warrior. Mord looks at the team, trying to evaluate them. He notices that none of them seem very interested in his presence, but he knows they're advanced warriors at the very least. They're probably concerned about a rookie warrior being thrown into a special mission, so he has no choice but to prove himself. One of the men begins walking toward the protagonist, and he prepares for a fight. However, before anything happens, the man grabs his hand and introduces himself warmly, saying that he's the rookie everyone's been talking about and that it's a pleasure to meet him. This unexpected attitude leaves our hero confused, as he was expecting hostility, but he soon realizes that everyone accepted him quite easily. Before things get out of hand, Kestner calls for attention, ordering them to focus. For the next 10 days, they will focus on teamwork, and he mentions that he needs to challenge the tomb of the god of combat, so he won't be able to participate. He instructs Erickson to take care of Mord, which Erickson confirms. The man starts by telling the protagonist that they should get to know each other first, introducing himself as an advanced warrior, and Reek, who is also from the Vernar's lineage. In the strategy they will use, our hero will help Reek support Kestner, and since teamwork is important, he hopes they all get along well. However, the protagonist looks at Reek's unfriendly face and wonders how he's going to get along with this guy. Erickson then calls their attention, saying they don't have time to waste, pointing to the training area and telling them to start. 10 days later, Viscount Kestner emerges from the tomb of the god of combat. Some men ask if he wants to eat something before heading out, but he says he must prioritize the mission. Kestner bids farewell to his subordinates, who urge him to take care. He's worried about the protagonist, wondering if he has adapted well. But when he arrives at the training grounds, he sees that Mord has adapted all too well. There is a battle happening between 2 people using divine blood. Not even Kestner can immediately identify whose power it is. When he looks at the protagonist, he thinks Mord looks completely different from when he first used the spirit of the god of combat. At that moment, Erickson approaches and Kestner asks how Mord is doing. Erickson responds that they taught him mana combat techniques and basic skills, as he didn't know them before. He adds that Mord has also managed to increase the time limit of his divine blood activation, impressing Kestner, who comments that's not something easily trained. Meanwhile, our hero seems to be having fun, engaging in combat training with Reek. He finds it thrilling because every time he learns something new, he feels like he's evolving a little more. He reflects that in the past, he had no dreams or goals and couldn't do anything. But now he feels like he can do anything he sets his mind to. A few hours later, the captain gathers his subordinates and tells them they are heading to the mission area. He asks if anyone's concerned about how the mission will go, but Erickson says no, since with Kestner around, everything will go smoothly. Kestner, however, is thinking that while individual skill is important, teamwork is crucial, which is why he was worried about whether the protagonist could adapt. But it seems Mord is mature enough to adjust to his surroundings, and Kestner finds him to be a bit more mature than he expected for his age. He then asks Mord if he'll be able to handle it, and the protagonist confidently replies that he can't wait to get started. Kestner is relieved, knowing that the hero is confident. He then orders his team to conserve energy until needed and to press forward into the battle. Sometime later, the squad reaches their destination. But when Kestner checks the dungeon situation, he realizes that the second stage of demonification has already begun. One of the dungeon observers arrives, and knowing the agent's capabilities, Kestner questions why the erosion has started earlier than expected. The man explains that it's because a new demonification front has appeared in the region. He goes on to explain that if demonification occurs in 2 nearby locations, the likelihood of them merging increases, which accelerates the erosion and makes it more dangerous. Even though they are tired, Kestner orders everyone to get ready. He leaps forward, followed by the rest of the group as they search for the dungeon's core. Our protagonist, while observing the castle, thinks it looks like he's staring at a picture. The reason for this is that a massive demonic castle stands in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a huge storm of lightning. He deduces that this is likely the dungeon's core. However, it won't be that easy to reach as a swarm of hellhounds appears, all of them bloodthirsty and spewing fire from their mouths. But of course, they aren't the only monsters our heroes will have to worry about, since right behind them, a group of orcs can be seen. Kestner orders the protagonist and Cage to activate their divine blood. At the same time, the three begin their transformation, causing a small burst of destruction around them. As the three undergo their transformation, those without Vernar's blood simply watch. Even so, the hunt finally began and everyone charged toward the monsters. Each member focused on their objective. Even those without Kestner blood managed to use a variety of weapons and techniques to hold their own, destroying every demon, hound, and monster in their path. The ogre, realizing that they were actually at a disadvantage, began to grow fearful. As he watched one of the hunters preparing a lightning spear, the ogre tried to propel himself forward to strike. But with just one throw, the hunter unleashed a blast like a Kamehameha through the monsters. Despite appearing to have the upper hand, Kestner still felt something was off. The pace was unusually quick compared to the number of monsters. Reek soon noted that the demonic fusion was already underway. The protagonist added that it was too late to call for reinforcements. Therefore, the plan had to be executed perfectly, and they needed to clear a path to the center as quickly as possible. Kestner ordered the protagonist and Reek to handle the Cyclopses, while he took care of the rest. The protagonist immediately began preparing his attack, once again concentrating mana in his fist, and with just one punch sent several Cyclopses flying backward. Reek was impressed, noting that even though it was Mord's first time facing demonification, he showed no fear. He realized the protagonist was truly different from a normal person. The problem was that Reek became too distracted watching his friends battle, failing to notice a demon right in front of him. The creature began condensing energy in its mouth, ready to fire. Reek knew he needed to cast a spell as quickly as possible, but it seemed like there wasn't enough time. However, before the demon could fire, a light descended from the sky, and like a meteor, something fell, eliminating the monster. It was the protagonist who had managed to stop the beast's attack, telling Reek he was there as his reinforcement. Reek nodded in agreement, and the two of them charged at the creature, attacking in unison and forcing it to its knees. This was the moment the protagonist had been waiting for to strike its weak point, its eye, which was now completely exposed. With a simple attack, he managed to eliminate the demon. Watching this scene, Reek was truly terrified. He had thought the boy was different, but the reality was that he was an absolute monster. Before the creature's blood could rain down on them, Reek conjured a shield to protect them, commenting that the Viscount had probably already reached the center, and they should hurry. However, as he looked ahead, Reek became alarmed. The Viscount was standing still, staring at something. It quickly became clear that there were several demons in the distance, 5 of them, indicating that the fusion had already occurred. Kestner explained that the fusion had accelerated the demonification. Moreover, there were 2 high-ranking demons at the dungeon's core. But as the protagonist was following his companion, he suddenly stopped. Something had grabbed his legs. The monster let out a malevolent laugh, and the protagonist was immediately pulled down. He tried to call out to the superior, but when Reek looked back, it was already too late. The protagonist had been taken. He fell hard onto the ground, confused by what had just happened. But soon he heard a voice remarking that he had fallen from that height and was still intact. So he was probably a young man with the blood of the god of combat. Surveying his surroundings, the protagonist began to grasp the situation. He had been taken to the demon gate that connects to the demonic world. This was likely the deepest part of the dungeon, and the man standing before him was its core. The demon introduced himself as Baron Ultrace, chosen by the root of formidable darkness, the one who would bring death and chaos. On the surface, Reek informs his captain that Mord has been taken, alarming Kestner, who wonders when it happened. The bald warrior tells him to follow as he knows where Mord was pulled. When they reach the location, however, they are surprised by what they see. Meanwhile, down below, the protagonist questions Baron Ultrace about why he brought him there. The demon explains that when 2 demonic territories merge, one leader must remain to become the core, and in this case, it was him. For now, the other leader is up above having fun. Since he lost the duel, he became the core, but with 3 people carrying divine blood, he decided to at least devour the youngest one. He explains that he always prefers the young over the experienced because fresh meat is tastier. Even the protagonist isn't confident about fighting a demon of this level. It's explained that the stronger the demon at the core, the wider the variety of demons spawned, ranging from common to advanced. However, there are nobles ranked from Marcus, Count, Viscount, Baron to Baronet. A Baron is strong enough to kill most specialist warriors, which is why Kestner, up above, realizes this is bad news. He knows the boy has immense potential but hasn't fully unlocked it yet. Therefore, fighting a noble demon will be difficult. Kestner remarks that the demon is disgusting for choosing to capture the youngest while being confident in devouring them. Reek says he'll help, but as he begins to transform, the captain tells him there's no need. He fully activates his divine blood and says he'll handle it alone. Meanwhile, the protagonist below is thinking that there's no need to test this demon any further. If his only option is to fight, then he'll give it everything he's got. The demon, still confident, questions if the protagonist really thinks he can do anything with divine blood. But before he finishes his sentence, he's hit by a kick from our hero that sends him flying. The demon, however, manages to stay on his feet and acknowledges that the protagonist is better than expected, but warns that his end is near. The red-skinned demon clasps his hands together and begins performing a ritual, summoning a circle behind him. From the circle, fireballs are launched toward the protagonist. But as the attacks approach, the protagonist simply readies a punch. He strikes the demon's magic, shattering the entire illusion. What he didn't anticipate was that the fireballs would explode on impact with him. The Baron mocks the hero, saying he'd hoped to toy with him a bit before killing him. But before he can continue talking nonsense, he's punched straight in the mouth, sending him flying and kicking up a huge cloud of dust. As the demon checks if his jaw is still intact, our protagonist is already preparing another attack. He summons several energy spheres into the air and hurls them all at once toward the demon, causing a massive explosion. Reflecting on how he's fought many people since becoming Mord, this is the first time he's truly gone all out. The problem is, when he looks ahead, he's shocked. The demon, having lost 50% of his health, has entered his second phase, triggering Berserk mode, and the protagonist is stunned that he can still move after that attack. Even so, Mord had anticipated that it wouldn't be easy to defeat this demon. The Baron begins to approach, destroying the ground with each step. With no other choice, the protagonist starts to tap into the power of the crystal, raising his mana to match the demon's. The two energies clash, causing a shockwave to burst in all directions. However, a sword begins to materialize in the demon's hand. Its sheer size alone matches the height of the protagonist. Baron Ultraze readies his first attack, but the protagonist is closely watching the sword's movement. Before the blade can reach him, he charges at the Baron, delivering a punch with all his strength. After the successful strike, another cloud of dust rises from the impact. As the protagonist looks back to see if the demon has finally been defeated, it seems that the Berserk mode took its toll, as the demon's head is now consumed with rage. At that moment, the demon's body begins to fall slowly, and the only thing left floating in the air is the dungeon core. Realizing what it is, the protagonist is left astonished, while the core glows, showing that he finally managed to complete it. On the outside, it seems that Kessner was also successful in his fight. Stippy orders Reek to collect everything, since he must head as quickly as possible to the deeper layer to try and rescue the protagonist. Reek says it's dangerous for him to go alone, and that he should wait for the group, but he quickly leaves, telling the man to stay calm. However, when he gets there, he finds the protagonist unharmed. He becomes startled, looking around and wondering where the demons are. Our hero says there was only one wielding this sword. Then the man says that this is a sword used by a noble demon and wonders if he killed him. The protagonist says he got lucky since the monster let its guard down, but Reek thinks that even with its guard down, it would still be impossible for a noble demon to lose to a boy who just awakened. So he says that the money this sword will bring in is quite a lot, thanking the boy and finally considering him a true warrior. We know that Kessner brought the protagonist on the mission so that he wouldn't get involved in the conflicts of the successors. He wanted to become a protective shield until it reached a point where Mord could choose what to do, and for that, he thought it would take at least 5 years, but now he thinks 1 year will be enough. After completing the mission and preventing demonization, they received a few more, which is why it took a month and a half to return to the Archduchy. There, Kessner explains that in a few days there will be a banquet, where they gather everyone who has completed missions to receive rewards, and it's held every 2 months. Since the rewards are given by the Archduke himself, it's an important event, so he tells him not to be late. Our hero knows that many important people will be there, and he is sure that the successor candidates will be too. In the novel, the protagonist faced many life and death battles with the Archduke and therefore devised a plan to resolve the conflicts with him. The key to this was getting close to Leon Werners, someone who left the house. He made him Archduke, and after that, the succession war began with Leon Werners at the center. So when he won and was officially recognized as Archduke, the Werners family became an important ally of Aiden. Since our hero is against the protagonist and against everyone who is his enemy, the best ally now is the Werners family. So he needs to bring the Archduke to his side, and so far there are 5 strong candidates, and they will all probably be at the banquet, so he must keep an eye on everything that happens. Erickson appears, calling Mord, and when asked if he was waiting for him, he said that probably no one would accompany him, inviting him for a drink after the reward ceremony. Someone then calls the expert warrior Erickson and the common warrior Mord to enter, and as soon as they step in, everyone at the banquet begins talking about the protagonist who managed to defeat a Baron demon alone, talking about his physique and that he might be even stronger than the legitimate sons. Someone then greets Erickson, saying it has been quite some time, and he quickly bows his head, explaining what he truly does, introducing himself to the young Master Dren, the 3rd candidate to succeed the Werners. He asks the young Master to give him a moment as he would like to speak to Mord alone. However, someone appears saying they don't find that polite and calls him brother. Soon the blonde man with a goatee looks back, questioning what he is talking about, then realizing that the young man is Vidin, the sixth candidate to succeed. Vidin says it's obvious what his brother wants to talk to Mord about, assuming he wants to bring him to his side. However, the man with the goatee says his brother is completely wrong, and that in fact he came to apologize for the rudeness of his subordinate. Last time, he sent a letter to the protagonist through his allies and clearly instructed them to be polite, but it seems they were rude to our hero, so he must apologize for not controlling them properly, handing a small golden box to the protagonist, and hopes he will accept it as his apology. But our hero realizes that he is only apologizing in front of everyone, so that he can't refuse. In truth, this man is much smarter than he had imagined and probably excels in socio-political matters. Mord thanks him for the gift while the man remains smiling. But someone who is not at all happy is the redhead, watching the scene, who is furious with his brother, thinking he is trying to take Mord for himself. So he also approaches the protagonist, explaining that he met him through his subordinate Wolves, whom he had previously defeated. But before he could finish speaking, someone calls for the protagonist, and immediately the redhead knows whose voice that is. Soon our hero turns, greeting his sister Erna, while she says there's no need for all that formality. She also turns to her brothers, saying she wants to talk to the protagonist for a little bit too. This makes the redhead even more stressed, saying he doesn't want to lose him to a younger sister. His sister says that he's someone who really likes younger relatives and even hurt his arm in their last encounter. But the redhead responds that it was a necessary punishment because she hurt his legs. The bickering continues while the protagonist analyzes that Vidin is the Duke's son and Erna is the daughter of the Duke's sister, so they likely don't get along well. Looking around, he realizes that there are only 3 successor candidates present: Dren Vernars, who is careful but not very trustworthy, Vidin, who is a spoiled daddy's boy, and Erna, who is somewhat odd, though he still doesn't know what her real abilities are. However, at that moment, another person arrives, giving orders to the younger siblings. Erna is surprised that her brother is there since she thought he would be busy. Even the redhead can't believe he came, as he doesn't like banquets. But soon the young man explains that he only came to personally meet the star of the event, introducing himself as the expert warrior Huron. When he shakes our hero's hand, he remarks that his hands are callous and that he must have trained a lot. He is impressed by his recent feats of defeating a baron with his fists and says he would like to fight alongside him one day. Our hero remembers that this man was one of the candidates who made it to the end and that he seems like a nice person with monstrous talent. However, at this banquet, one person is missing, and he starts looking around, wondering where young Master Alan is. But at that moment, his search is interrupted by the man presenting the banquet, who announces that the Archduke wishes to speak. The old man says he is impressed by the achievements everyone has made in these past 2 months, and that now they will begin the reward ceremony. The first to receive his reward is Kessner, who kneels before the Archduke as he speaks some words of honor. The next to be rewarded is our hero Mord, introduced as a 15-year-old boy who killed a baron demon, and to make the reward match the level of his achievement, besides giving him the trophy, they will raise his ranking to intermediate warrior, leaving the other nobles impressed, as he has only completed a few missions. However, since he already killed a baron, everyone assumed he would be ranked as an expert warrior. The Archduke says that our hero has evolved greatly since the last time they met, and that he would love to see his current skills. And our hero, a bit downcast, says he will count the days until then. A while later, everyone is at the banquet, but the protagonist is interrupted by Kessner, who says he needs to talk to him. Then he pulls him aside, telling him not to drink too much since tomorrow he will go to a new place, and he soon explains that his master wishes to see him. Sometime later, we see our hero walking through the castle corridors, where he comes across a giant door, wondering if he should open it. But before he touches the door, it begins to open by itself, and he realizes that someone is using telekinesis. Inside, there is a man, and our hero notices that he is someone very powerful. The white-haired man says that he has made a long journey to get there, welcoming Mord and introducing himself as Ilden Vernars. He is the general of the elite warriors legion called the Watchers Legion and also the older brother of the current Archduke. Even though he was the first young master, he ended up being defeated in a combat spirit battle against his half-brother, the current Archduke. After that, Ilden never appeared in public again, leaving our hero confused as to why he had been summoned to his mansion. The blind old man asks to see the protagonist's face, and as he analyzes the hero's features, he says that he doesn't look much like his father. Then he asks if he knows why he was summoned. Seeing that he doesn't, Ilden explains that he wishes to make him an offer, but first he would like to test his abilities. The protagonist recalls that in the novel, Ilden wanted someone's help to take down Leon, who had tremendous potential due to Aiden's support. However, if he proves his potential here and now, the old man will choose him. Seeing the child before him activate the divine blood makes the old man give a small smile. As he already prepares for combat, with a leap, the protagonist advances quickly, attacking Ilden before he could do anything. But his attack ends up hitting a ball of energy that appears in front of him, and the moment his fist collides with the ball, he is instantly thrown back. Realizing that the ball reflected his attack, he understands that it's not an ordinary impact ball, since it was enveloped in his aura, which is something even masterclass mana fighters cannot do. Moreover, he is controlling dozens of them at once. This is impressive because controlling aura is not easy, as it is beyond the realm of mana control. It's only possible to control it this way if one's mana senses are extremely developed. But as he prepares to attack, he thinks that aura is not impenetrable and should avoid the rebound from his physical attack and push him back with brute force. As the protagonist charges forward, the old man comments that his mana has increased, and soon he begins unleashing several attacks that nullify the old man's aura balls. Realizing that the young man is fast, he still believes he has the advantage since he can create more impact balls. However, this was already something our hero anticipated. So if he creates his own impact ball, like raising it in his hand, he lifts it and begins spreading the ball's energy throughout the room, causing several other mana balls to appear in the air. Then, like a forest of lightning, all the old man's attacks start being replaced by the protagonist's. Realizing that he managed to nullify his attack by using his own momentum against him, the old man is shocked, wondering where the young man learned something like that. However, soon the protagonist appears behind him, landing a punch to his back. But the punch hits Goju's impenetrable barrier. Realizing that the old man uses his own aura as armor, he decides to use the fragment of the world to gain much more mana. The old man says it was good that he used his opening against him, but the momentum is decreasing. However, while distracted, he ends up getting hit by an impact right in the middle of his back, which hurls him into the wall, causing massive damage. Mord is happy that he finally managed to land a hit on him, but then he starts hearing laughter echoing through the room. It is explained that there are several levels of awakened divine blood, and the first is when the color of one's hair and eyes turns gray. Still laughing, the old man says that finally, while wondering if this is fate, he believes the god of combat is probably watching this fight. We are then shown that at the second level, gray lightning circulates around the user's body, and reaching this level means one's existence is nearing the divine realm. Before our hero could even react, the man's already behind him, preparing to strike him with his fist. But Mord doesn't retreat and strikes back as well, making both attacks collide in the air. However, in the exchange is only the protagonist's fist that is trembling, and soon he is thrown against the wall just as he had done to the old man. Looking at the child, he comments that his reflexes are incredible, impressed that he managed to hurt him even while using the second level of Divine Awakening. And on top of that, our hero shows no fear in battle. Ilden says that it's enough and that he doesn't know how far it could go if he is too carried away. Meanwhile, our protagonist remarks that even though the man lost to the Archduke, he still possesses monstrous power. Soon, the old man approaches, saying that his legion needs someone strong like our hero, making Mord ask if that's the offer while the calm man confirms. His desire is for Mord to join the Watcher's Legion. The Vernar's Archduchy has a legion of warriors called the Guardians Legion, meant to be the elite of the elite alongside the Watchers. Since the southern region of the continent has a large demonic territory, the Watchers are responsible for monitoring that area. The White Demon Kingdom has not yet been fully demonized, but it's on the way, and one of the Guardians Legion's roles is to fight against other influences within the continent. Their opponent is an organization that holds nearly the same level of power as the Vernar's family, the renowned Ordar's family. One of the reasons it's dangerous to join the Guardians Legion is the recurring conflicts with this family, which lead to the highest death rate. That's likely why Kessner wasn't too happy, as it's the most dangerous place in the world for a warrior who has just awakened his powers. The old man explains that all the successor candidates want him, and the special treatment and requests will not stop coming from all sides. Kessner is helping him, but even he has his limits. However, the White Demon Kingdom is a place where the successor's influence doesn't reach. The protagonist knows he's right, and besides, he stands to gain a lot if he goes there. So he says he has two conditions, leaving the old man intrigued as to what those conditions might be. The first is that the protagonist wants the old man to be his sparring partner from now on, making him think that Mord wants him to teach him. But Mord quickly clarifies that he just wants to spar, leaving the old man curious, wondering if he believes he'll grow stronger simply by dueling with him. Then he quickly states the second condition, which is that he wants to roam freely for a year under the excuse of being on a secret mission. The old man asks what he plans to do for an entire year, but the protagonist doesn't answer, even though he knows it's a selfish request. However, it is during this time that the novel's protagonist becomes stronger, so he needs to find the world fragments before Aiden discovers their existence. For a second, the old man gives a small smile at this request, understanding that he has no other choice but to accept it, but he will only allow the protagonist to roam for 8 months. This was expected, and it shows that Ilden is very generous with those he holds high expectations for, as was depicted in the novel. Even though he doesn't fully understand why he's giving his all to make Leon the Archduke, this is still a great opportunity, so he thanks the old man for his generosity. While he thinks that even the current lord wasn't as strong as him at his age, and as a bastard son, he cannot become Archduke, but he can be the shadow of one. Sometime later, we see the protagonist talking to his servant, asking why those soldiers are there. but he finds out that they are Erna's subordinates and that she is waiting for him inside. Upon entering her residence and finding his sister seated, he begins the greeting, but she explains that he doesn't need to be so formal since they are not in public. She then places a box with some inscriptions on the table and tells him to take it. His sister asks if Dren's gift was good, discovering that it was just an expensive healing potion. Then she quickly says that this is much better than a simple potion. As he opens the box, he begins to see a glow coming from it, revealing a crystal ball of blue liquid inside. He instantly realizes it's a treasure that can make any human incredibly strong. This is his chance to make a giant leap in his progress, and it's called the Tear of the God of Combat. In the novel, Aiden gave this to Leon to boost his strength. However, a side character ended up taking it instead and died. Erna explains that she received it as a birthday gift when she was 10 years old, and it is a very valuable item. But if he can't handle it, it will act as a poison, advising him to take it only when he's ready. She explains that when she helped the Imperial family on an expedition, she received the same gift. So she used the one she got for her birthday and kept this one. Meanwhile, our hero is simply shocked that she gave him a potion that only 3 succession candidates had in the original story. He then thanks her, but she says it's nothing and just wishes to talk more when he returns. Sometime later outside, our hero thinks that she only came to deliver this gift. He won't forget this and the fact that she valued him to this level even though he's not on her side yet. 20 days pass and our hero seems ready to start his journey. However, before leaving the castle, he runs into Kessner, who questions whether he's really leaving, when the protagonist says he just wanted to slip away quietly. The blonde man says that while our hero might be strong, he's only 15 years old and still doesn't understand how dangerous the North is. However, he's surprised when the protagonist simply thanks him for everything and says he will never forget his care since Kessner endured all kinds of pressure from the successor candidates while trying to protect him. Even so, at no point did he try to control him or stand in his way. In truth, he was only being kind to Mord, so the hero vows to repay him for everything he did. Then he tells the man not to worry, asking if he really thinks he can't take care of himself, and that he'll see him again once he returns, bringing a good drink for them to share. Even though the protagonist tries to ease his mind, Kessner remains a bit serious, but soon gives a smile, saying there's nothing he can do to stop him from going, wishing him good luck, while the protagonist wishes him good health so they can meet again. As he leaves the castle, we see that he's being watched from the top by someone. This person quickly jumps from the castle walls, and once on the ground, begins blending into the surroundings, becoming invisible. Mord seems to sense someone's presence and looks back, but when he turns around, he sees nothing but grass. It's then explained that those who learn Impulse must go through several levels, and the first is using Impulse on the sword and body. The second is using it like a gauntlet. The third is to imbue and strengthen objects with Impulse. The fourth is to condense and accelerate it into an explosive power. And the fifth and final level, which most magical artists can't reach, is known as Aura. Our hero spent 20 days dueling with Ilden. However, he wasn't satisfied with just duels and taught him several important things during those days. Thanks to this, he became stronger, but is still not close to using Aura. However, the small creature before him is capable of making our hero awaken his aura immediately. A few days later, deep in the forest, our protagonist is thinking that the warriors sent by the Archu to ambush him should arrive soon, since they want to capture him before he reaches the Northern Territory. At that moment, something almost hits the protagonist, who barely dodges it. And when he looks up, he is surprised as a battalion of warriors is there to ambush him. One of the commanders shouts, "Fire," and a barrage of arrows is launched toward our hero. The man thinks his plan works since there's no way he can dodge those thousands of arrows. However, from the smoke, small lightning bolts emerge, and soon the protagonist is revealed to be unharmed, having activated his divine blood, leaving the warriors impressed that he activated it so quickly. The general then orders the mages to cast fire magic on him, which heads towards our hero. But he begins preparing a new magic, summoning those same impulse balls he used in his fight against Ilden. And when the two magics collide, a massive explosion occurs, devastating the entire forest. Due to the fire and heat, the forest is now nothing but ashes, as we see several warriors lying on the ground. The last surviving mage thinks this is impossible and never imagined he would beat the fire using explosive impulse. Realizing that the boy is far better than people said, Mord simply looks coldly at the last remaining mage. Then he quickly advances, delivering a punch to the barrier the mage is summoning. But he's surprised when nothing happens after punching the shield. However, all he needs to do is punch even harder. But before he can finish his attack, he is ambushed by one of the remaining warriors. Upon hitting the protagonist, the man seems to notice something different. He realizes that the MC is using an aura gauntlet. Thus, he discovers that our hero is now capable of controlling aura. But before he can do anything, he gets struck by the protagonist, who manages to catch him while still in the air and delivers a punch directly to his chin, sending him flying like a meteor. Although the man is severely injured, he remains alive. Meanwhile, the protagonist speaks, saying that he knows who he is. He states that his name is Varen, and that he is considered the best warrior. He quickly explains that he saw him once in the training center on the day of the banquet. He asked about him because he was alone in the ceremony and was told that he's the best martial artist in magical combat. He's a cunning man but has a short temper, so it's best not to approach him. The enraged man asks who said that, but the protagonist doesn't answer, of course. Instead, he says that Varen is the loyal dog of the Archduke, so he's sure it was the Archduke who sent him, probably after his fruit. In the novel, the Archduke appears as a powerful but unforgivable villain, and there's a simple reason for that. He committed the terrible sin of consuming his own children. The Archduke's subordinate is shocked, wondering how the protagonist knows this, but the protagonist remains silent, looking at him with superiority. It's explained that in the novel, the Archduke always displayed great combat talents but became alarmed as he started aging. At that time, a secret society called Silver Blood approached him, offering a solution to consume his own bloodline. With the Vernar's bloodline as a fertilizer, a fruit that maintained his youth would grow. And since it was more effective when he used someone who had already awakened the divine blood, the Archduke sacrificed all the bastard children, leaving only Mord. The reason was that he needed someone to fill the role of Archduke since 5 years ago the god of combat left the seal of the Demon King for his descendants to protect. Once a year, the Archduke must fight against the reincarnation of the Demon King in a one-on-one duel. Since the duel doesn't take place in the real world, he doesn't die if he loses, but the seal weakens. However, he can't enter again, so losing is akin to losing his position as Archduke. That's why he needed someone to fulfill that duty for him. We then see the Emperor holding a twisted apple with veins while someone asks if he's going to see Mord before leaving. However, he replies that he won't and that he doesn't understand why his brother is taking the boy to the Guardians Legion. He even trained him for several days at the mansion, so he can't comprehend why someone so precious was sent alone to such a dangerous place. But in reality, that doesn't matter. It would even be great if Mord swore loyalty, but he's someone who can't be controlled by anyone. So the best option now is simply to devour him. After Mord bites into the apple and closes his eyes to focus, when the Emperor opens them again, his transformation is complete. Lightning bursts from his body, showing that he's in the second stage of divine blood. He then turns to Varen, ordering him to bring the protagonist no matter how much power it takes, warning him that Kestner is also keeping an eye on him, so he must be very careful not to get caught. Varen thinks that only those chosen by the Archduke can know about his dark side, and even though Kestner is the warrior the Lord trusts the most, he doesn't know about this place. That's why Varen is determined to prove to the Archduke that he is better than Kestner. But currently, the man who was confident in capturing the protagonist finds himself severely injured. Meanwhile, the protagonist questions whether he came to capture him to obtain the fruit. Our hero had guessed this because it wasn't hard to figure out that the Archduke wanted to capture him. For the bastard children, there are only two paths. Considering the fact that the bastard children have been disappearing more frequently, he likely already met with the Silver Blood. Also realizing that he can't use him, the Archduke must be thinking of simply getting rid of our hero by consuming him. Mord was sure they would send a master-rank magical combat artist, which is why he acquired aura by using the tears of the god of combat. Then he approaches the man, telling him to be quiet and explaining that he's going to die here, so he'll be kind enough to explain the future. The patriarch will perish in a pathetic way, and everyone will remember his name as something shameful. Hearing this, the young man remains ignorant, claiming that the Archduke is a divine being with the greatest talents in the world. But the protagonist remains silent, realizing that this man is completely submissive to the Lord. Varen, after analyzing for a moment, thinks that maybe it's possible for this to happen, since just moments ago the boy managed to create an aura gauntlet, and he's only 15 years old. His talent surpasses even that of his master. That's why he cannot allow such a monster to evolve. He quickly draws his sword and launches an attack on our hero, activating the Aura Blade, a technique capable of cutting even the successors of the Verners who have awakened divine blood. However, this won't affect the protagonist as he has the Aura Gauntlet. But at that moment, Varen begins emitting a strange aura, making our hero realize that he's using his own life force to amplify his power. All of this for the worthless Archduke to whom he swore loyalty. And while Mord admires this determination, there's no chance that Varen can defeat him. Soon the energy balls launched by the protagonist explode, while the charred young man realizes that he combined aura with impulse to make this happen. This should have been impossible since he had just learned how to use aura. However, the protagonist appears, bidding farewell to the Archduke's loyal dog, and finishes his opponent with a well-placed punch. The masked man who had been observing from a distance thinks that Mord is much stronger than they were told, and that he knows about the fruit and the silver blood, making him a huge risk to the organization. He immediately starts running to inform his superiors. But what the mage didn't count on was that the protagonist had not forgotten about his presence, finishing him off with a simple attack. As the mage falls to the ground, the protagonist looks at the remaining blood on his hand, noticing that it has a silver hue, realizing that the man was part of the Silver Blood organization. Mord thinks that he got involved with them sooner than expected, and it's going to be annoying if they come after him. But that doesn't matter. He just needs to become stronger and eliminate whatever comes his way. However, at that moment he ends up punching the air and hitting something. He then says to the invisible person that he knows they've been following him all along, asking them to reveal themselves. Yet the person remains in their transformation, trying not to be detected. His arrogance irritates our hero, who starts delivering a barrage of punches at the invisible figure. This forces the person to partially reveal themselves, somewhat stressed out by Mord's immediate resort to violence. Mord notices that the young person has pointed ears and deduces that they are likely an elf, a species that bears the symbol of long life, growing and aging much more slowly than humans. But since this boy's ears are smaller than those of an elf, he must be a half-elf. So he asks the boy who he is. The boy introduces himself as Keel from the Guardians Legion and says he's part of the Shadow Wolf Squad, which works directly for General Ilden. It is explained that the Guardians Legion, responsible for preventing demonization in the northern region, has the descendants of the Verners as its core strength. However, there are other squads like the Shadow Wolf, which specialize in different tasks, such as protecting allies and assassinating enemies. For this reason, they possess stealth abilities that are different from the common Vernar's warriors. The young man believes his stealth is the best among all the Shadow squads, but even so, the protagonist managed to detect him. He then explains that his master sent him to escort Mord, and that he was supposed to help him when he was in danger to ensure an escape route if necessary. But after seeing how easily the hero destroyed those men, he realizes that Mord is a much greater monster than the general had described. To prove it was a direct order, he hands over a bracelet, explaining that his lord said this would be proof enough. Upon seeing that mysterious item, our hero understands that it was indeed Sir Ilden who sent him, as this is the bracelet he himself broke in battle. When the young man hears that the protagonist managed to break the general's bracelet in a one-on-one fight, he's astonished, while the protagonist tells him to go back home. Turning away, Mord tells the young man to leave since he has already failed his mission, or rather, neglected it. However, the boy knows he can't return as his general would be disappointed. Thus, he says that he will repay his failure by assisting the protagonist throughout the journey. Not only that, but he will also stand guard during the night so that Mord can sleep and take care of basic tasks like cooking. Hearing the young man practically humbling himself, Mord is confused, wondering if he's really willing to do that, and he recognizes the boy's name from the novel. A boy abandoned by his father for being a half-elf, who, when on the verge of death, was rescued by Sir Ilden. When the protagonist and his companions were fighting against him, it was this young man's spiritual magic and stealth that helped a lot. Of course, since he was just a side character, he ended up dying later, but despite appearing young, he's an expert in assassination, and considering that Silverblood will likely ambush him, it wouldn't be bad to have him as a companion. Especially since his duty is to protect Mord, the hero accepts the boy's offer. He orders him to start cleaning immediately, and when the young man asks what he should clean, Mord explains that it's the battlefield and all the men left on the ground. Since leaving traces behind isn't a good idea, this will prove how skilled he is. Meanwhile, at the Lord's castle, someone reports that Varian was defeated. There were signs of a battle, but no bodies, leaving the Patriarch impressed, as he didn't know Mord had an escort. Even so, he orders them to let the boy go for now and just keep an eye on him, knowing that the Silver Blood organization likely suffered losses as well. Thus, even if they do nothing, Silver Blood will act on their own. We then return to the protagonist, where Keel is impressed, saying that this was the tomb Mord was looking for, and that it took them 5 days to find. He soon asks what they should do, but the protagonist simply lies down, saying he will wait until nightfall. He orders the half-elf to stand guard until then so no one gets close. The young man tries to ask why they're doing this, but our hero is already deep asleep, leaving the young man disappointed since he realizes Mord won't tell him anything during the trip. By nightfall, the half-elf looks a bit frustrated while lighting a fire. He is a respected person in the Artucci and an advanced warrior with 10 years of experience, but now he's practically working as a cleaner for a child who is only an intermediate warrior. He tries to calm himself, thinking that this is just a job, but as he's about to curse the protagonist, he hears his name. He quickly pretends that he wasn't talking about anyone, but Mord merely warns him that it's starting. When the young man wonders what is starting, he notices a dimensional rift forming in the air. It is explained that there are secret dungeons that can only be revealed when all the conditions are met. And in this dungeon, there are 3 conditions. The first is that the moon must be in its waxing phase. The second is that nothing must obstruct the moonlight from reaching the ground. And the third requires someone with divine blood to be within 5 meters of the tomb. Initially, this dungeon isn't that important, but the reward inside is of great interest to our protagonist. Realizing that his young master is about to enter the dungeon alone, the half-elf boy explains that Mord doesn't know what dangers could be lurking inside. But Mord quickly reassures him, saying he knows exactly what to expect and that he can handle it alone. Therefore, Keel's job is to make sure no one gets close. Before the half-elf can say anything else, Mord leaps into the dungeon, passing through the portal mid-air, leaving his subordinate completely alone in the forest. Inside, we discover it's the Lunar Temple. In the past, many gods existed, but none remain now. These temples used to be dedicated to venerating them. Soon, something catches Mord's attention. When he looks ahead, he sees several skeletons walking and screaming that an intruder has invaded the tomb. These skeletons are warriors who gave their souls to gods who have since perished, leaving only the madness of their souls behind. Looking around, Mord realizes there are more than 100, but it doesn't matter. as he just needs to get rid of them quickly. It's said that these souls are terrifying in the real world, but in this realm, defeating them is possible with ordinary methods. All because of the mana, and we see the protagonist easily smashing through several skeletons. Even though they are easier to deal with here, they are still warriors from past lives. So Mord prepares a mana ball using aura and hurls it at the skeletons, causing a massive explosion. No matter how strong these warriors once were, our protagonist is far stronger now. Now that all the minions are gone, he just needs to deal with the Guardian. As he approaches a statue of a goddess with a dog's face, he says this is the core, and the Guardian is this creature now rising before him. We then discover that the Guardian is another werewolf, angered because Mord has trespassed on sacred ground without permission and declares that he will be sacrificed to the goddess. Mord recalls that this lycanthrope was supposed to be a powerful enemy in the novel. Even though Aiden was stronger than most advanced mages, he struggled against the werewolf because it had magical defenses thanks to the blessing. While the werewolf warms up, he says that the protagonist has invaded the sacred realm alone. And though disrespectful, it seems he understands the pride of a warrior. For that reason, he will be treated as one. Soon, all the wolves and werewolves gather around Mord and the Guardian, forming a kind of arena. The lycanthrope declares that the battle between warriors is the most sacred thing, and since Mord came with pride, he will respond in kind. Mord finds this odd, as this didn't happen in the novel. Nevertheless, he says he prefers to fight one-on-one. However, as he prepares, he says he doesn't want to waste time and commands the Guardian to shift into his final form instead of waiting to die slowly. In the novel, the Guardian was revived with the power of the goddess every time Aiden and his friends killed him, so it would be better to start the fight at the final stage. Hearing these arrogant words, the werewolf says it's rude and wonders what makes Mord think he can say such things. But soon, the protagonist reveals his transformation, asking if he should prove it through sheer force. Upon realizing that the young man before him is of divine blood, the werewolf acknowledges that he is qualified to say such things and agrees to do as Mord requested. He begins absorbing the power of his subordinates, growing until he reaches an enormous size, surpassing even the hero's expectations. Mord then charges at the giant werewolf, and the two attacks collide in midair. However, in that moment, Mord is surprised by the light the werewolf emits, realizing he's using a divine shield capable of blocking aura. But just because something can block aura doesn't mean it can block it forever. So our hero starts breaking through the shield with a flurry of punches. The werewolf has no choice but to defend with his body. Yet his strength isn't enough and he is thrown far away. Realizing that the young man is as strong as expected from someone with divine blood, the werewolf considers trying something else, but the protagonist is already in front of him, delivering another attack. However, the strike misses as the werewolf ducks his head just in time. With a malicious grin, the werewolf lands a counterpunch to Mord's abdomen, feeling pleased to have landed a direct hit. But his satisfaction fades quickly as he notices that Mord absorbed the impact through his muscles. Mord then grabs his opponent's arm and remarks that he has an interesting acceleration ability, but in a fight, speed isn't everything. He then throws the werewolf into the air, leaping after him. Mord begins preparing an aura-infused attack. Delivering a solid hit to the lycanthrope's face, the creature is sent flying into the goddess statue, bouncing off it and crashing towards the ground. Our hero uses the statue to change his trajectory, preparing a final blow to finish off the monster. In midair, the werewolf is helpless and Mord knows this is the end. But before completing his attack, he notices a smile on the werewolf's face. However, this doesn't stop our hero from kicking the creature, finally ending the fight, and he feels relieved that he didn't need to use the world fragment or the blessing from the god of combat. Still, he wonders why the werewolf was smiling at the end. Suddenly, a voice echoes, saying that the battle was impressive and thanks Mord for granting its warrior an honorable rest. The statue explains that the werewolf wanted to die as a great warrior, but was stabbed in the back by an enemy and died dishonorably. Unable to forget this, he became the ghost of this dungeon, and what the protagonist did for him was a great gift as he freed his soul. Mord understands that this was probably why the werewolf smiled. He finally got the duel he wanted. The statue then gives Mord a gift for freeing the warrior's soul, explaining that it is a bracelet that, when exposed to moonlight, will protect whomever he wishes, whenever he wishes. Analyzing the item, Mord realizes that this is something Aiden never obtained in the novel, and it will be extremely useful when he needs to fight while protecting someone. He thanks the goddess, saying he will make good use of it, but soon notices that her presence has already vanished. He moves closer to wrap things up, striking the statue, which reveals the crystal he had been searching for. Mord is pleased that he finally found the world fragment, and as the crystal shines, it captures his attention. Sometime later outside, we see wind spirits swirling around the dungeon, while Keel, sitting on a rock, asks if Mord has finally completed it. Mord notices that these spirits are the half-elf summons, and he stood guard just as ordered. He's starting to appreciate how obedient the young man is. The half-elf then asks if they can go to a village to sleep, but the protagonist says they'll pass through several cities and villages from now on, as they'll be traveling across all corners of the kingdom. Sometime later, we arrive at the merchant city of Lorraine, We see the servant begging for rest since they haven't stopped walking, while our buffed Jigakja hero is happy that he's managed to acquire 2 world fragments. After completing the Wolf Goddess dungeon, they finished another one, but it didn't yield any additional rewards. Now their goal is to find a particular object and venture into a specific underground location. The two then find an inn to spend the night. Mort explains that they'll stay there until nightfall, but the half-elf says he needs to leave, hoping his master will stay in the room until he returns, begging him please as he has something important to take care of. Mort lies down on the bed, telling him he can go report to the city leader all he wants, as he already knew everything from the beginning. The half-elf is shocked that Morgan already figured it out, but he also explains that he needs to ask for more money, as these expensive lodgings and daily meals have left him completely broke. As he leaves, he says he'll be back, and our protagonist replies that he won't leave unless something inevitable happens. Several hours pass and night is almost upon them. However, as Keel returns to the inn, he notices everything is on fire. He almost feels like he has clairvoyance since something inevitable really did happen. It is explained that as pieces the ancient gods used to create the complete world, each world fragment contains a different element. While one might contain lava fields where fire spirits dance, another might hold arid, sun-drenched deserts. Like puzzle pieces, they can fit together, and once they do, they can grant immense power. Another incredible thing is that when these fragments are united, the user can unlock a mental realm they can access at will. From the outside, it appears as if they are simply meditating, but in reality, the individual is in their mental training. It is explained that the world fragment he obtained from the tomb of the god of combat contained a towering mountain that reached the clouds, and the fragment from the dungeon had a dense forest, but unfortunately, the third fragment didn't connect with either of the other two. However, at that moment, the protagonist feels something. Mort immediately stops in the middle of the forest, sensing a presence. We return to the real world, where the inn he was staying at is under attack. Outside, a woman is screaming frantically for her son, who is trapped inside. She begs the men holding her back to let her go, as she desperately wants to rescue him. At that moment, our hero emerges from the burning building, holding the child in his arms. He hands the boy to the woman, who thanks him profusely. However, Mort isn't interested in the gratitude and immediately assesses the damage caused. People are helping each other, and they've hired a healing mage to assist the injured, since women, children, and men were caught in the explosion. Seeing this disgusting scene, Mort begins to feel stressed. At that moment, he spots 2 people fleeing amidst the chaos. Realizing that one of them is responsible for the explosion, he picks up a stone from the ground, muttering that he doesn't know who the person is or where they're from, but he will make sure that their coffin stays closed at their funeral. We then see a man with a ponytail running from a hooded figure. Frustrated that he can't catch the man, the hooded figure fails to notice the protagonist approaching from behind. Mort launches a quick attack, which the hooded figure barely dodges at the last second. Even so, the man had to stop his pursuit and angrily demands to know who the protagonist is. But Mort dismisses him, saying it doesn't matter and he doesn't need to know who he is, especially since he's already dead. The hooded man with the face tattoo doesn't know who sent Mort but calls him weak, saying he won't be able to defeat him. However, in the very next second, our hero appears behind him, landing a solid punch to his face, sending him crashing into a wall. Coughing, the man seems incapacitated as Mort approaches, ready to end the fight. But before he can do anything, the man who is being chased shouts, saying he doesn't know who Mort is, but he shouldn't underestimate this guy. The hooded man takes advantage of Mort's distraction and swallows a pill. As the protagonist watches the transformation taking place, the other man urges him to run. However, it's too late. The transformation is complete, and the man has turned into a hulking brute like Ronnie Coleman. He orders the protagonist to pay attention as he's about to display his full power. But in that moment, all his strength and power are reduced to nothing with a single blow from Mort, leaving the blonde man with the ponytail in utter shock. Mort orders him to come down immediately. Every instinct in the blonde man tells him to flee. As he prepares to do so, he gets kicked in the back, slamming into a distant wall. Our hero then orders the man to kneel and answer his questions, remarking that knocking him out would be the best option. We then see that the man is already trapped in a chokehold by Keel, panicking as he struggles to breathe. Soon, his mind begins to fade, and he wakes up later in a completely different place. Terrified, he threatens to scream, but the protagonist gives him a warning. Other than answering the questions, he better not dare open his mouth. The first question is why he was being chased. Mort explains that the man probably belonged to the organization of the Second King. The man tries to speak but gets punched in the head, and the MC explains that these people are part of the Monarch's Return group who seek to revive the Archlich. It's explained that the hierarchy of mages is clear. There are beginner-level mages, intermediate-level mages of the 4th circle, advanced-level mages up to the 6th circle, senior mages, and those in the domain of the 9th circle are called high mages. The title of Archlich is given to high mages who have become undead, commonly referred to as monarchs, as they command armies of the undead. The Archlich of the Monarch's Return group had a backup plan in case he was defeated, fragmenting his soul into pieces and scattering them. Once all the pieces are gathered, he can be revived, and that's what the Monarch's Return group is seeking. But even knowing all this, Mord still doesn't understand what this man has to do with it, wondering if he's a subordinate of another secret group. The blonde man, realizing that Mord can use aura, knows he must be of Vernar's blood and thinks it would be a problem if the Archduke opposed their group. However, his silence only angers the protagonist, who prepares to punch him again, causing the man to quickly blurt out the name of his group. The blonde man explains that their goal is to prevent the 3 prophecies of ruin from coming true, one of which is the return of the monarch. He further explains that if the Archlight that these people worship is revived, the world will practically come to an end. Mord recalls that in the novel, the Lich was easily defeated by the protagonist, and he finds it amusing that someone like this is trying to stop a world-level disaster. He then returns to his first question, trying to figure out why that man was following him. The blonde man finally speaks, saying it's because he stole something important. Mord shows him a key and asks if that's what he's talking about, discovering that it's a key that opens doors to ruins. Since this group called Grumolder and this key didn't appear in the novel, Mord realizes that the story has likely deviated from the original path due to the theft of the key. The resurrection of the monarch happens near the end of the story, and even though Aiden and his friends managed to defeat him, he still caused thousands of deaths. For this reason, Mord decides to prevent the sacrifice of those people and stop the monarch's return group. Mord then turns around, saying he's going to keep the key and orders the man to leave. His servant Keel questions whether it's really okay to let him go, but Mord responds that the group isn't that strong, so there's no need to worry. He explains that their current goal is the complete annihilation of the monarch's return group. He then states that there are fragments of the Archlich's soul in the ruins, and that's where they'll start. His servant asks if they're going immediately, but Mord explains that they first need to go to the black market. It is then revealed that he purchased a torn book and an old dagger, leaving Keel confused about what he plans to do with these items. The two head to a rather foul-smelling place, and Keel wonders if the great Archlich really left part of his soul there. The protagonist explains that there's a hidden passage in the water, and he instructs the young man to use his spiritual magic to unlock the path. The half-elf activates some of his wind spirits, and has them search through the water until they find the passage. He's pleased that he succeeded, while the protagonist notices that even though Keel complains a lot, he still follows orders. The wind spirit then begins preparing a gust that splits the water like the Red Sea, revealing the hidden path. However, when they reach the door, they find it sealed with magic. The protagonist explains that the dagger will come in handy now, so he makes a small cut on his hand, saying that long ago the gods were at war with one another. At that time, the warrior god lost everything to the gods who wielded magic as their weapon. That's why he sacrificed his own existence to create this weapon, an artifact that only those with divine blood can awaken. Moreover, its function evolved to work as a key for ancient ruins. To use it is simple. Just invoke anti-magic and destroy the magic. Throwing the dagger towards the sealed door, we see it begin to glow and shoot out some lightning, quickly dissipating all the sealing magic. Mord calmly calls the dagger back to his hand. The half-elf is impressed that Mord bought these overpowered items for the price of a beer, but Mord remarks that this is exactly how the black market works, and now it's time to fulfill Keel's wish. It is revealed that before their journey began, Keel wanted to venture into dungeons and discover hidden treasures. Mord then tells him that after they finish off the monarch's return route down there, this is the exact secret dungeon he was searching for. The two descend, and Keel is amazed by how vast the place is. He asks if they shouldn't launch a surprise attack, but the protagonist explains that they likely already know of their presence and will attack them soon enough. At that moment, several ghoulish monsters appear, while a group of mages and warriors question who these intruders are and how they managed to enter. Mord immediately charges forward, plowing through the ghouls and heading straight for the group. During the attack, he senses two men approaching, so he summons his aura gauntlets to block their attacks, leaving the two men confused by the gauntlets and realizing that if those are aura gauntlets, Mord must be at master rank. Mord easily disposes of the monarch's henchmen, and as his eyes glow the golden hue, the enemy mages begin preparing to strike. But before the mages can do anything, they are practically wiped out by Keel's wind magic, who asks what the mage was even planning as multiple wind spirits swirl protectively around him. A little later, we see the same mage crawling on the ground, screaming that he's being chased by a monster. However, in the next moment, this mage will meet Hades personally. Keel, who finished him off, thinks to himself that he's not so bad after all, but of course, they are nothing compared to Mord. He then points to a large door and says it must be the entrance, while the protagonist mentions that first they need to destroy all the magical objects because they are dangerous. After destroying all the cursed items, they finally stand before the door, and the protagonist says that now the dungeon truly begins. He uses the key he took from the man the day before and opens the gate, realizing this seems to be some kind of demonification dungeon. This is a dungeon created by borrowing the powers of demons, but it's not necessarily connected to the demon realm. Since there was no detailed information about this dungeon in the novel, the only thing Mord knows is that it's subterranean and goes down 9 levels. It follows the standard dungeon pattern. The deeper it goes, the stronger the monsters become. It was definitely not supposed to be an easy dungeon, but the two of them cleared it in under 10 minutes. Keel looks quite happy with their loot, having acquired several good magical items, and says that with all these, he won't need to worry about meals for months. Looking ahead, he notices their true objective. We then see the Archlicht monarch seated on his throne. The Lich remarks that it's been a long time since he's seen something alive. Just from the energy alone, the half-elf can sense the Lich's strength. But Mord says there's no reason to be afraid, as this is only a fragment of the original. This surprises the Archlich, who acknowledges that despite being an unwelcome guest, Mord knows of him. However, as Mord begins to transform, he says that he doesn't know much about the Lich, nor does he need to, as he's merely a relic of the past, and he'll make sure to render him even more dead. Seeing Mord's transformation, the Lich recognizes him as being of the Wernher's bloodline, and remarks how strangely only the most arrogant seem to pass through here, yet all of them have been eliminated. He explains that the protagonist is nothing more than a remnant left behind by the god, and for that, he will teach him the greatness of magic. He then summons 2 diamond golems, but the protagonist quickly appears behind one of the golems, destroying it and creating a cloud of dust, while the Lich expected him to have this level of power. What he didn't expect, however, was the punch that was about to come his way. The Lich reacts quickly, casting a defensive spell to block the MC's strike. Yet, as he stands there, a wind spell begins to swirl around him, forming a tornado with the Lich at the center. Even so, the Lich finds the trick annoying and with a single stomp, activates the Foret's curse, which suppresses all of Keel's magic. Upon realizing that his spell was nullified with just a single movement, Keel is terrified. But this is the moment the protagonist was waiting for to throw a dagger at the Lich. The Lich finds it irritating that the dagger bypassed his defensive spell but believes it won't do much damage to his body. However, it's at that moment that the dagger begins to glow. As you may know, an Archlich is a being made entirely of dark magic, and the effect of an anti-magic weapon on a creature made of magic is completely lethal. Thanks to the immense shock, even the Lich's robes are torn to shreds, and he can't comprehend how something like this exists. Taking advantage of the opportunity, MC remarks that letting one's guard down in a fight means death. He then activates the mountain destruction technique, shattering the Archlich into countless pieces. His skeletal skull rolls across the floor, but it's swiftly caught by the protagonist, who tells the Lich to shut up and that he'll always be a loser, both now and in his original form. And with that, Mord finally defeats the skeleton once and for all. Mord turns to the subordinate, saying that Keel did well in buying time as it made the battle a bit more convenient. As Keel praises the dagger for piercing a defensive spell, the protagonist explains that if it had been an active spell, the dagger wouldn't have been able to penetrate it. The two then proceed to search for the dungeon's core, finally encountering the 4th fragment of the world. And when they destroy the core, they finally return to the real world, with the dungeon's entrance being a fake room. There, Keel looks around in search of something, but when he realizes that the thing he's looking for is not there, he starts screaming in despair for having lost all his loot. Then he looks at the protagonist, who is also a little confused. He then asks if the protagonist knew this was going to happen, and that no matter how much he thought about it, a dungeon that had been closed for more than 200 years maintaining so many intelligent undead is strange, questioning if it was a dream of chaos. It is explained that the dream of chaos is the boundary between reality and a dream. It's like a very powerful illusion, but everything you experience there is real. The problem is that nothing from this dungeon can be taken to the outside world. Mord thinks that his hypothesis must be correct, since being locked in this place for 200 years would lead to a mental collapse, but it's different if these minds are fake. He then says that he didn't know this and that he wasn't trying to deceive him. But since he was part of the battle, he will give some loot to compensate for what he lost. He then prepares a punch while warning him not to complain about the loot. That punch was directed at the ground, and the two begin to fall into a secret room that was right below. Upon landing, the protagonist thinks that this place is actually a secret space, and that it can only be found after solving the hidden puzzles inside the fake room. Keel, after looking around the room for a bit, is amazed, seeing some objects on altars, while Mord thinks he didn't need to solve the puzzles since he already knew where the place was. Soon, the half-elf mercenary is happy that all those things look expensive. He says that now they are in a place that really looks like the treasure hall. He begins to analyze a bag while the protagonist explains that it has a dimension 5 times larger than the space of this room. Not only that, but is capable of automatically retrieving any item from inside and is made so that only the owner can touch it. But obviously, the protagonist is not going to give the OP item to his servant, giving him another item instead. This is the lightning ring, capable of allowing the user to use lightning magic up to the 6th circle. Additionally, it has great defense against lightning-type magic, and it seems that the young half-elf is quite pleased, although he had a somewhat suspicious look on his face as he looks at the ring he received. Among the other things in the room, there's the necklace capable of protecting someone against unauthorized magic use and detecting subtle magic. There's also this golden key that also acts as a map, prompting Keel to ask how many parts there are in total, discovering that there are 7 and soon questioning if our hero wants to find them all to prevent the resurrection of the Archlich. He says yes, but also because the 7 parts are fragments of the world, and now that they've taken everything, they must leave. But before leaving, they approach the skull that is in the center, and Morn explains that this is the part of the Arclight. What they defeated in the dungeon is the manifestation of a consciousness imbued in this part, and if they don't destroy it, he could come back. In the novel, the protagonist and his friends imagined that this was just decoration and ignored it. As a result, the Arclight was revived. However, now this insect will not hurt anyone else.